Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another aec+tech talk. I'm so happy to have you here with us today. Today, we are doing something a little different. This is an interactive session today focused on one of the biggest challenges I see over and over again with AEC technology companies. Making it immediately clear what your product does, who it is for, and why it matters. So why it matters, how is it different from the other 10 or 100 similar products and tools in the market? AEC buyers are very busy and they need to quickly understand the value of the product and the workflow and the problem your product is solving. So today we are going to talk about positioning, what it actually means, what it is not, and how better positioning can make your product easier to understand, remember, and choose. We'll also look at how to sharpen homepage messaging, turn features and technical workflows into a stronger narrative, and avoid the kind of vague language that makes potential customers ask, wait, what does this product actually do? So I'm very excited to welcome our special guest today, Nikita Morell. Nikita has spent more than a decade helping architecture and AEC businesses clarify their positioning, messaging, and websites so they can attract the right clients and win more aligned work. Nikita brings a very practical, honest, and clear approach to messaging, which is exactly what I think many AEC technology companies do need right now. Nikita, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you and to learn from you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for such a lovely introduction. I'm very excited to be here. So as you said, today it's all about really fixing your positioning. And really, I think this is, as you said, an overlooked topic in the industry. I haven't seen many people looking at, positioning and things like that. So today we're going to be zooming in on this area here, which is positioning. So I want to make it very clear that positioning is different from messaging and it's different from copywriting, and we will go through it, but this is where today we're going to be focused on. Now, in terms of, you've just given me a lovely introduction, so I don't need to, but just so that you know, as Niknaz said, I am a brand messaging strategist, and I recently launched Dirt, but you may have seen me do things for Nikita Morell, which is my agency for only architects, whereas Dirt is all about AEC tech and construction and all the good things that are on site. And just a quick one, I'm also hosting a 2-day we've called it the Unboring Business Conference for Architects, and that will be in October in Melbourne this year. So if you know any architects, definitely let them know this is on. It's all about the business stuff that you don't learn in design school. Okay, so let's get back to it. What is positioning? Now, I could give you some fancy definition of positioning, and basically if you ask 10 different strategists, I'm sure you will get 10 different answers. Some say it's perception. Others say it's what people say when you're not in the room, but I'm actually going to start with what it is not. So this is my perspective, and I believe that positioning is not a tagline. It is not a dot on a matrix. So you might have seen people do those graphs and they plot out where, your company's positioned. It's also not one of those statements, we do X for Y. I feel like sometimes a lot of these statements, they're based on a lot of assumptions and they haven't actually done the work. They kind of just plug in things for the sake of it, and they can get a bit awkward and they're not really used. So this is what positioning is not. Now, what is it? Now, I see positioning as the act of deciding who your service is for, what is it, and why it's better. So in order to earn a designated space in their minds, you have to answer these questions. And when I say in their minds, I mean your customers' minds. So positioning really is just occupying a specific space in your customer's mind. So it answers this question. When I think of a problem, do I think of you? Okay. And for most AEC tech companies, the honest answer is no. And it's not because the product is bad, but it's because the positioning is vague. So, for example, project management software for the construction industry doesn't really tell me anything. And it doesn't tell me specifically what problem you're solving, or why, I should switch from the spreadsheet I've been using for 6 years, right? So good positioning is narrow enough to mean something clear, and it's also good positioning is remembered. Okay, so you might just quickly, you might be wondering whether you have a positioning problem. You're probably sitting there going, well, do I have a problem? And here are some 5 signs, okay? And these are just 5. I think these are the top 5, but basically it's people read your website and they don't really understand what you do. So you're having a lot of sales conversations or with other stakeholders really trying to explain what your product does. People, maybe number 2 is people get what you do, but not why they should pick your product over the competition. And number 3, you're going after multiple segments but don't know who to prioritize. And this is very common in the aec+tech industry, is that you've got lots of people. Some of them are C-suite execs, some of them are the actual users, and you don't know who to prioritize. And number 4, you need to educate the market in order for them to buy. And this is a positioning problem, and we'll go through why in a little bit. And number 5, you have multiple products and struggle to explain them in a simple way. So this is also quite common, is that maybe you've got different products under one umbrella and you're struggling to explain it in a clear and simple way. Okay, so today all we're going to do, very simple, we're not going to do any fancy frameworks or anything. We're just going to ask yourself these 5 simple questions, okay? So we're going to go through each of these. Now, very important, these 5 questions are intentionally in this order. So it's not like some random order I've created. Each question is only possible because of the answer before it. So just think about that for a second. So this is a very, very, I've thought a lot about the order of these questions, because you have to answer the question above to be able to answer the question below. So if you swap the question order around, it messes things up, but each unlocks the next. Okay, so let's start with, what alternatives do you replace? Now, we start with this question, not because competition is the most important thing, but because better is a meaningless word without a comparison. So let me think about it this way. If someone comes to me, I'm based in Australia, and if someone says, Nikita, is Sydney better than Melbourne? I'm going to say, well, the answer entirely depends on what you care about. Better for beaches? Yes, I think Sydney is better. Better for coffee? Well, then Melbourne. So you can't know the answer to this question, what alternatives do you replace, until you know what the client is comparing you to. Now, most aec+tech companies think their competition is other software in their category. I bet you it's usually not. It's whatever the client was doing before they considered you and what they'd go back to doing if you disappeared tomorrow. Okay, so for field management tools, for example, a WhatsApp group, a folder of photos in someone's iPhone, what else? A printed drawing set that's, all got lots of revisions on them. That they are the competitive alternatives too. For estimating software, it could be a spreadsheet that's been handed around to everyone for the last 10 years and the company still uses. That's the alternative, okay? And another alternative, which a lot of people forget about, is also doing nothing. Right? So for daily reporting tools, your handwritten site diary is what they might be using, and it's just maybe easier for them to keep doing that and do nothing. Right? So you need to give people a compelling reason to leave whatever they are currently doing and hop over to what you're offering. Okay, so that's really important, that you understand what you're going to be replacing and what gap you're filling as well. So for an exercise, I would, for this question, to answer this question, I would write down every single thing someone is doing instead of using your product. So don't just write down competitors, write the full list, spreadsheets, doing nothing, in hiring a person to do this job manually. That list is your context. Okay, on to question 2. What do you do better? Okay, so we can answer this now because we know who we're comparing ourselves to. So you can answer, what are you doing better than your competitive alternatives? So look at the alternatives and what does your product do better than that? So as an exercise to answer this question, I want you to write down in a list against every competitive alternative, what are you doing better? And I want you to be super, super specific. So then you've got your competitive alternatives, you've got what you do better than them. This is where the tricky part comes. And when I say tricky, I mean like scary, because this is scary to do this, right? It's emotionally like you're making decisions, you're making commitments, and it can be quite overwhelming. And I'm saying this from personal experience of, creating Dirt, creating Archicon, creating Nikita Morell. I've also had to pick an X factor, right? So what you do now is you pick only one thing that makes you better. So look at that list of things that you do better and pick one competitive alternative, one thing that makes you better. And that one thing that makes you better than that alternative is called your X factor. So your X factor is the single most compelling reason a specific person would choose your product over the thing they'd use instead. Now, most AEC tech companies have a list, and they find it very hard to have an X factor because the list feels safer. This is all the things we do well, we're AI native and this and that. You've worked hard on this product, right? I get it. It does a lot of things well. So why should I only talk about one thing? And the reason you talk about one thing, so when I say talk about outwardly into the market, is because a buyer can only hold one thing in their head. One, not five, especially in today's day, right? We're pulled in so many directions. So you don't want a matrix of capabilities and what you do well. You just want to have one clear reason why you are the obvious choice in this specific situation for this specific buyer. When you give them five, you've made them do the work of deciding which one matters most. And most are not going to bother. People do not want to use brain power to figure out, oh, here are all my features. Here is all the things they do better. Well, wait, what matters to me, right? So, affordable, high quality, powerful, and easy. Sometimes there's contradictions within these things as well. You're saying you're affordable, but you're also saying you're high quality. Human nature finds these two things very hard to kind of pull together. So when you have a lot of things as well, people get a bit skeptical and they think, I don't believe any of this. So that's why this positioning, as I said before, it lives in this gap between what they get from the alternative versus what they get from you. And one thing I've found that really shows a positioning problem is this. And it's when people, and I've seen it a lot, when AEC tech companies, I don't mean to pick on this one company because it's across the board, but it's when they do these rotating headlines. I think this is a top sign that they haven't nailed down their positioning, because now what they're trying to do is be everything to everyone, right? I think here's another Cantiv do it as well. I think they just relaunched their website actually. And again, they're trying to, instead of doing, whereas Ignite said the person they were trying to target, they're trying to say, oh, we do all these things and it rotates. So this, I would say, is a positioning problem. Oh, sorry, I just lost. I'm back. Okay, so sorry, Niknaz.
Great. I'm like, wow, this is everything you're saying is amazing. Okay, so I'm going to.
I hope so. Okay, so I've just shown you some not so great examples. I don't want to be too negative. So I'm going to share this one. This is Monograph. Now, Monograph, I think, have done a great job because they really nailed down kind of who they're for and the benefit they add, right? So go onto their website and you can read through and you can see that their positioning is very, very clear. The easier way to run a strong A&E firm. And I think further down, they also even name their competitive alternatives as well. So I won't go fully into this because I'll do some full in-depth reviews at the end, but check out their website for sure. Okay, so we've looked at the competitive alternatives. We've looked at what you do better. Now comes number 3. What problems do you solve? Now that you have an X factor, that's great. But right now, your X factor is still just a capability. It's just something you do, and that's not really a reason to buy. So the next step, most AEC tech companies skip or rush through, and I've seen this. They're like, okay, well, this doesn't matter, but it does. So what they do now is a lot of you name the feature, maybe the benefit, and then they stop there. But the outcome, the thing the buyer actually feels, never gets said. And this is where your words and your messaging comes in. But for now, we'll focus on positioning. So you need to ask, so what? until you get there. And you might have heard this exercise being done before, but basically there's two types of problems, right? You have the technical problem and then you have the human problem. So, no one really wakes up thinking, oh, I need better document management workflows. They're thinking, well, I can't find the latest drawing version and the concreter is standing there waiting. That is the problem. So we want to really flip it and talk about the human problem as well, right? So the technical problem, for example, is version control for construction documents. I've seen that 100 times. But the human problem behind that technical problem is the wrong drawing gets built and now someone has to pay for it, right? Another example, the technical problem, project financial reporting. Human problem, you don't know if you're making money on the job until 6 months after it's finished. Another example, technical problem, or actually basically those two examples are perfect. It just shows that the technical problem is about your product and the human problem is about their life. How are you helping your buyer's life? How are you improving their life? Because positioning needs to live in the human problem, because that is what's going to make people stop scrolling and think, okay, this product is for me. Okay, so now as an exercise, I want you to take your X factor from question 2 and now ask, so what, 4 times in a row. And the answer to that, so what, is usually the human problem that goes on the homepage. So if you're saying project financial reporting, so what? Well, it means that all my numbers are transparent and I can see them. Well, so what? Well, it means that, I can see where I make money. So what? Well, I can see where I make money before the project's completed or during the project, right? So you just keep asking so what to those technical problems till you hit a human problem. And that is what goes on your homepage. Okay, question 4. Now, this is when you can finally answer, who do you want to serve, right? And this is where I would say 9 times out of 10 when clients come to me, they say, oh, this is who we're built for. You answer this down. Question 4, you can see. It's not the first question we ask. Now, this is where you say, well, who is this built for? Who is the person? The answer to this question is, who is the person who cares most about that specific outcome? So how we just did that so what exercise? Who cares about that most? Because that is who you're building your product for, okay? And this is where you ask who you are built for. So you need to, if you don't do this and you don't do that exercise before, then what you could end up with is solving all these problems for people who don't actually really care about them being solved, okay? So the answer, as I said, to this question is the person who cares most about the specific human problem you just named in question 3, okay? Now, it is important that in aec+tech, the buyer and the user are often different people, so I get that. But you need to have your champion versus your CEO or your C-suite, okay? So most aec+tech companies I've seen do tend to try and write for the CEO and that C-suite of people, but because I guess it feels safer. But in reality, the person who's doing the research is usually much closer to the problem, and they're the ones who need to make that case internally to sell it upward. So you do really need to have a good handle of that kind of internal sales flow as well, right? No point writing for the CEO of the company if they're not the ones who are even visiting your site. If the buyers, the users are the ones visiting your site, you need to be writing for them, and then you need to help them build a case to internally say, okay, hey, this is why we need to change over or adopt this platform. Okay, so my advice would be to really write your homepage for your champion, the person who is internally championing, saying, hey, we need to try this at least, not the final decision maker. So a way to kind of figure out who is obviously looking, who you should be targeting is look at your demo data, see who's signing up for these demos. They'll want to know how it will solve the annoying problems, they run into on a regular basis. They want to know what you can, how you can help solve their problems, and why it's better than alternatives, right? So really think about their thought process. And then, only then, do you have a chance of getting the recommendation to the person who signs the dotted line. However, there is one exception. If you're targeting small companies where the CEO and executive is still very much involved in the day-to-day, so maybe they're at a different kind of, it's a smaller firm, the CEO is very involved, then they may actually be the one visiting your page. So again, you need to be doing your market research, your data, look at your data and see who is actually visiting your site. I think Procore, they do this very well. You land on their website and this pops up. So you basically are doing a bit of a choose your own adventure. And I'm a big fan of this because what it means that your positioning remains the same. It always remains the same. There's one positioning for your aec+tech firm, but what changes is the messaging, right? That next layer down. So that's where you can have something like this pop up if you've got different people that are going to be, your product can service different types of people and roles. So yeah, each market does require different marketing as well as messaging. But for you, I would say it depends on, I don't know what your products all are, but I would say pick one of these and then win it. This is Procore, let's not forget. So for example, for field tools, the buyer is usually the project manager, the operations director, or the IT lead. The user is usually the foreman or the site supervisor, who has never asked for software in their life and probably doesn't even want it. But your positioning has to convince the buyer that their team will actually use it, right? Because adoption is the only thing that makes this purchase worth anything. So there's lots and lots of layers that you really need to think about with your positioning and messaging as well. And as I showed you with Monograph before, their entire positioning is really built around kind of the one person architect owner. Yes, they've got engineers and that on there, but their messaging is very specific, to each. Okay. Oh, sorry, I just went through that. But yes, you can just see it's built for someone running a small to mid firm, who wears all the hats. So they speak very directly to that target customer. But basically you want that specificity because it means someone's going to lean in and go, oh, this is for me. If you're trying to write for everyone, they're not going to have that. So basically this kind of exercise to answer this question, it almost has two parts, right? The first is backward looking and the second part forces specificity. So part one, I want you to really think of your 3 best customers, right? Don't imagine who you want to be your customer. Start by looking at who you've already got most value from, right? Think of 3 real customers, not biggest by revenue necessarily, but your best, the ones who got results quickly, the ones who, were happy to pay and, renewed without a conversation or, told people about your platform without even being asked, right? They're your best customers. So write down their names or companies. And now for each one of those, answer these 4 questions, right? Not about their company size or sector, but about their situation. So, what were they doing before they bought from you? What happened right before they decided to buy? So that what happened, what triggered? Did a project go wrong? Did someone new join? Did they grow too fast or a process was too old? Find the trigger. What changed after? Not the feature they used, but the thing that actually got better in their working life, that human problem. How did it help them? And what do they say when they recommend you to someone else? Try and get this data because this is what's going to help your positioning. And then what you want to do is look for the pattern. Okay, so look at those 3 answers, those 3 customers and all the answers and see if there's things that are in common, right? With their situation, with their growth stage, what's the commonality, right? Because that pattern is your ideal client, but you have to do this work. Unfortunately, this is the step a lot of aec+tech companies, they're either just saying, plugging it into AI, which is fine, but you need to give AI this context. So this is the type of work you do before you give it to Claude or Gemini or whatever you're using. And this is where a lot of people are skipping and they're just going straight to just asking Claude to write their tagline without finding out who they're competing against. Okay, final question. What are you? So what you call your software determines your competitors, right? This is the last question. Are you a construction management tool? Are you an analytics tool? Are you a BIM management tool, a procurement platform? All these questions because the market category comes last because it requires you knowing all those other questions above. So you pick this after you know your audience and your differentiated value, okay? So there's no point saying what you are if you don't even know who you're built for, or what your X factor is, that value add. So the job of a market category is to create context. So the moment you name what you are, you trigger a set of assumptions, right, in the buyer's mind. Even before they've read a word of copy, they've seen the demo, or they've spoken to a salesperson, they know what you are. So the category that you operate in, does this work instantly and automatically? Are you a CRM? Because if you call yourself a CRM, then people are going to start comparing you to other CRM systems, right? And they're going to look at your weaknesses, potentially not your specific strengths, because they're comparing you to a huge company. Okay, so this is why category choice is strategic. It's not just a description you put up there. Pick your category that most accurately describes your product. And this for aec+tech matters a lot, because as I said, if you call yourself a construction management platform, the buyer potentially is going to immediately think of Procore, and then you're getting evaluated against Procore's feature set and their integrations and their customer base. And if you can't win that comparison, which, I'd say a lot of companies can't, you've put yourself in the wrong category, right? So not because the product's wrong, but because the product category. So I'm not going to go through all of these in a lot of detail. I'm mindful of the time, but there's 3 strategies basically when it comes to category. And that's 1, to enter an existing category. This is probably the easiest. You need to have a very good X factor though. That's the risk, because to own a category you didn't create, you need to go in there strong, right? So you're basically saying, this type of product, but we're the best version of it. Okay, so that's entering an existing. You can narrow an existing category, and this is often the smartest move for aec+tech companies. So you get a broad category that exists, and then you create almost like a subcategory entirely on its own. So for example, estimating software is broad. Estimating software for residential builders is a subcategory. So you've gone and narrowed it. I think that, I've seen it done well, and it's a good move. And then the other one, the last one, which is the highest risk, but also the highest reward. It's very hard, but it's basically creating a new category. So you're creating a new one, you're making yourself the reference point. But if the category is too new and buyers don't know they need it yet, then education cost is high. The sales cycle can get really long, because you're explaining what it is before you can explain why you, if that makes sense. You're trying to educate them on what that category is, and then only at the end can you say, well, why you? So basically for this exercise, to answer question 5, take your X factor and write down 3 possible categories you could sit in. And then for each category, say, well, who does this put me next to? What are the competitive alternatives and the comparisons that people are going to say? Right? Does this attract the right type of customer? Does it repel them? So these are the things you really need to think about. And I know I'm overwhelming you. There's like a lot. But trust me, if you just answer these 5 questions in that order, you will unlock your positioning. So just a quick note, this is how your category shows up, on your website homepage, on your sales, in your procurement, if in procurement, if it filters buyers when they use your building, as a short list. Like it's the thing that is matching the category with the filter. So if you don't match the list or make the list, someone's sitting in finance, they're saying, oh, they don't need to fix this, then that's where you're going to fall down. Sales, obviously, how is your team selling this in? This is all where your category shows up. Okay. So have you nailed your positioning? So basically, after you do all of this, you say out loud to someone who's never heard of your product in 1 sentence, who it's for, what it does, and why it beats whatever they're doing right now. That's it. Okay, so it doesn't have to be we do this for Y and, X or whatever it is. This is basically you're just saying who it's for, what it does, and why it beats whatever they're doing right now. Okay, so I just want you to remember, positioning is the act of deciding who you are, who you're for, and why over everything else. It is the act of deciding. It is just a decision, and don't overcomplicate it. That's all it is. It's a decision. It's the act of deciding, and that is scary. Messaging, just quickly, it's the translation of your positioning. So this is when you take your positioning and you put it into language that works for a specific audience at a specific moment. And this is how your positioning shows up consistently across all your touch points. But that's your messaging, and people often get these two confused. Then you move to your copywriting, and this is the execution in words. So you have your key messages, but then copywriting is translating those key messages. So that's the actual words on your page. That is your voice. That is your case study title. That is your homepage headline. To be honest, I think this is where a lot of aec+tech companies start. They just start throwing up words. But you can't write clearly if you don't know your messaging, and you don't know your messages if you don't know your positioning. So it all comes in order. And it's taken me a long time to kind of figure out the best way to present this today and to make it very clear. And I think hopefully you understand that they're three very separate pillars. But as I said, each layer depends entirely on the one before it. So just, I know again, negative, but I want to show you examples of poor positioning, because you might be like, oh, that's kind of what mine sounds or looks like. And it basically, this is form as, again, this is not picking on anyone, but it's just to show, form follows you. So they've picked their category, AI native design studio, that's who they're going. Again, I think we're past the point where this is like, I don't think it is as much of a feature it was maybe, or a benefit that it was 5 years ago. So you need to really think, what do you want to lead with? What is your ideal client comparing you to? And what is their human problem they're trying to solve? So form follows you, it's very vague. What does that even mean? And remember, this above the fold, this is where people are going to decide whether they stay on your page or leave. Microsoft did a study, I think it was 8 seconds. People decide whether they're like in the right place or going to go click the next tab. What else we got? Augmenta, again, autonomous building design. This is not too bad, but again, it's like, well, this is just saying what you do. This is not telling me who you compare yourself against or what human problem you're solving. It's just, this is what we are. This is what we do, basically. So again, really think, what category, what problem? Program AI native tools for architects and engineers. This one's okay. They have said who they're for, but AI native tools, what type of tools, right? What, it's just so vague and it's just so broad. Remember, go narrow, go specific. How are these tools helping you? How are they going to help me as a customer, right? So even, since 2021, this is a waste of word real estate, word real estate on your website. So the main aim of me just showing you these is just to really zoom in and just say, well, be specific, right? If all else fails when you're translating your positioning onto your website homepage, be specific. Some examples of good positioning is, I quite like OpenSpace, always visible, never in doubt, the visual intelligence platform for builders. What I thought was really cool is that it sells the feeling. They could have opened easily with, 360 degrees of job site capture software or something like that, the literal thing the product does. But instead they went one level up and they kind of touched on the thing that the builder's probably losing sleep over, not knowing what's happening on site. So the never in doubt, it's just so strong and, never in doubt. It's just said with such conviction. So it's the promise they're giving here is the promise of peace of mind. And I thought what else was interesting is they've actually created a new category, visual intelligence platform, right? So they didn't call themselves reality capture or documentation software or a construction management tool. They kind of coined their own category and they've planted a flag on it. So look, again, they're going to have to do a lot of education, but I thought it was just a really neat example of saying, yep, this is how you create your own category. Okay. This is Fieldworks, big company, but what I like about this is it really kind of, again, kind of sells the promise, total project control. You do have to scroll down a bit to see how their positioning kind of comes out in the messaging. So I encourage you to go take a look. But what they really do is they take a stance and, they say a bit further down, you can't see here, but they say traditional firms manage risk by padding the schedule and the budget. We manage it by understanding the project deeply enough to take the padding out. So they've really, really head on kind of said what traditional firms are doing and how they are different, how they are better. They've got that X factor, right? That their X factor is, they take out that padding. So I thought it was really good. Yeah. Okay, now I just want to quickly go through two websites that two companies kindly put forward. I am only going to do two. So if you had one that you wanted me to look at, definitely just send it through, and I'm more than happy to just create a quick review of it as well. Just mindful of time. Okay, so first of all, we are going to start with PinMy. So they submitted for me to have a quick look at their positioning. Now, to be honest, these guys get a lot right. It was very hard to almost critique because I was like, okay, they understand positioning. So what I'll do is I'll just like run through some of the good things, and then some of the things that potentially they can improve. But I love this. So, stop losing decisions in WhatsApp, pin them on the plan. Now, what do they do? Remember the first question that I asked in that list of 5 questions. These guys nail it. So they've said, stop losing decisions in WhatsApp. They are immediately looking at their competitive alternative, which is WhatsApp, and they're saying how they're better than them, pin them on the plan, right? So very quickly, in these words, we know, what it does and why it matters. So we understand very quickly the mechanic of what they do, pin them on the plan, right? So this is very, very clever. They didn't lead with the feature, they led with the pain. Stop losing decisions. Like that is the pain. That is the human problem, right? That we spoke about in question 3. They've led with that. So, no, they haven't said annotation software. I'm sure that's a lot of people do. They just, again, tend to that kind of jargon. But they know that people wake up and they've got group chat with 200 messages and they have to filter it all, and they're losing decisions. They're losing opportunities because it's all buried in WhatsApp, right? So I think they've done that perfectly. And, they didn't compare themselves to these big other competitive software. They compared themselves to WhatsApp, which I thought was really clever, and people can immediately visualize that too. It makes it quite visceral. It's just really, really strong positioning. What they could do a little bit better is they could make, and this is just me being really picky, but they could make this word decisions a little bit more specific. What type of decisions? Maybe they could follow that up here. But that's, again, me being very picky. The subheading, voice notes, photos, videos, and text capture the moment they happen, pinned directly on the PDF plan, site photo, walkthrough video, or 3D model, used by site supervisors, BIM coordinators, and field teams in Spain, Canada, and Ukraine. I love how specific they've gotten with this, the countries, the people, what it is. I think that is really, really solid. The headline sold the outcome. Now the subheading goes to the features. So it's a bit of a capability list, which isn't wrong, but what I would say is there is a lot packed into here. Remember I said you're like throwing a lot of things. So they could have just picked one and gone hard in on it, because I think what they're trying to do is really kind of say we're all these things. So that's, again, just a little bit of me being picky. Because, as I said, buyers can only hold really one thing in their head. Out of these 4, if I was to, I've read through their homepage, if I was to pick one that I would lead with, I would do this one, the voice notes. You picture the actual moment that someone's on site, they've got gloves on their hands are full, they're standing in front of the problem. They're not going to stop and thumb type a paragraph, right? But they can tap once and talk. That's the thing the spreadsheet and the WhatsApp group physically can't do, right? Capture the record without stopping work. Like imagine that, right? As some sort of a copy. So that's what photos and text everyone has, but that voice note pin to the exact spot on the plan, maybe that's the X factor that's hiding inside the list. So, this is my job as a brand messaging and positioning strategist, is to really uncover that X factor. I help a lot of aec+tech companies do this. And I promise you, every company has an X factor. It's just about uncovering it. Just quickly, before I go into the next and the final example, is just these 2 things, which is the CTA buttons. Try it for free, book a 30-minute demo. Very clever to put these 2 And the reason I mean, normally I say I'll just have one, but the reason this is so clever is that basically you're putting your bets onto two things, right? Try it free. These are for people, try it free, no card, free plan, no card. It's an invitation. It says you don't have to be sure yet. Just come in, take a look around. Whereas book a 30-minute demo assumes that the buyer's already done their research. Maybe they've got this pain point and they're ready. It's a high commitment ask to book in a 30-minute demo. So instead of just having one of these, try it for free, all that, they've put in both. So it really splits the kind of awareness level and the stage of, the buying stage they're at as well. So I think that's really smart. They get to, have both. I think that was about it. There's a lot of smart things Pin might do. I think, as I said, you understand positioning, but there are some, I would dial up, if I had to be really general, I would dial up just how specific you're being, and I would just pick one thing. Be known for voice, right? I'm just saying, this is just an example, but be known for voice. And people think, oh, but Nikita, we do all these other cool things and now we're not going to be known for those things. But if you get famous for one thing, it's very, very easy to then kind of launch into other things, right? Because you're known for that one thing. Doors open, right? So that is my advice for PinMine. And now my final example is Matera. Now, Matera, it was great because these two are very different from each other. It's completely different to PinMine. PinMine seems like it's a finished product with real customers. Matera is a pre-launch, I would say. They're saying request early access. So it's still finding its words, it's a perfect place to be. So this is kind of and again, if you know me at all, and if you've followed any of my LinkedIn posts, you'll know that I'm quite honest. And so I don't mean any of this, offensively, but you'll see that, and it's fact. I think, because they're at that early stage, this is kind of what haven't nailed your positioning looks like, basically, on screen. So it's perfect timing, because the whole point is catching this stuff now, because it's cheaper to fix your positioning in the beginning than to fix it later. So again, the headline, the intelligence layer for building materials, does it say who it's for, what it does, and why it matters in 10 words? To be honest, no. But I think the biggest part here is the category invention. I think Matera, if you're going out, you want to have that category intention, because what it does is it creates those associations, right? Those mental shortcuts. You say that you're a procurement tool, there's already shortcuts in your brain for what it is. What you're trying to do is a lot. It's a lot of heavy lifting in terms of this is a category, a new category, a brand new space. So you either are going to have to invest a lot into educating people. What does that intelligence layer for building materials, what is it? And look, as I said, it's high risk, but it can be very high reward. So if you're willing to do that, then that's great. Otherwise, the buyer doesn't even know what you do and why they should invest their money in you yet, right? And also building materials, it's a huge industry, right? Can you go narrower on this? And again, just lead with something narrower, and then below you can say, we actually do all building materials, right? But what building materials? Concrete. You've got the image here. Always make sure that copy and design work together. But is it concrete, timber, glass, insulation? What is it, right? So at the moment, the headline is really telling me we're an undefined thing for a non-existent category yet. So that's just really important. It's a very enormous undefined market to go. And I guess the biggest thing here is read this and kind of say, well, what's the human problem, right? And there isn't one. So that's what I would say as well, as my advice would be to really lean in and put in a human problem. You think back to the PinMy example, stop losing decisions in WhatsApp. You saw that kind of forming in your head instantly. You saw the group chat in your head. Here, really, there's no person, no moment, no pain, no problem, no human problem that people can grip onto. Right? So this is kind of a textbook example, is if you keep rewriting your headline over and over and over again, and if it still feels off, 9 times out of 10, I would say that is a positioning problem. It's not a writing problem. And that's what I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's my words are off. I can't put it into words. I don't know. Maybe have a look at what you're messaging in. One step further, have a look at what your positioning is. Because I bet you haven't nailed your positioning, because once you do nail your positioning, the words come a lot easier. So yeah, even this from specification to procurement, simplified. Yeah, it's like, again, it's saying from here to there, like that's big, but what do you actually like? What is simplified, and who is it simplified for, and do they even want it or need it to be simplified? Yeah, and I think you go down the page. I think this is really, really well done. I would move some of this up into here. And I really like how they've got it, how it works. They've got the process. You've got some really, really good stuff on here. But again, even this CTA, request early access, for what? And how will it work? And will I need to pay for it, or is it free? And what's the benefit for me to be the first to access? Like, what's going to change in my life once I access this first? So at the moment, I would say that the call to action is running ahead of the trust. You haven't built the trust yet, and there's a mismatch for how little the page has really explained versus how much you're asking for. You're asking people to put in their details and to trust you with this platform. So, I would say for you, look at the competitive alternatives, look at your X factor, nail that down, and then rewrite this. So that's basically it from me. Hopefully that was valuable. I know that was a lot.
Thank you so much, Nikita. That answered many of my questions, because building aec+tech, this platform, this like database of all the tools. Actually, the reason I started building it 4 years ago was the same reason that I was confused by all these great tools and technologies that are out there in the market. And then as a decision maker, when I was technology director at the last architecture firm that I worked, so I had to go through like 10 energy modeling tools or visualization. And I was the one who I didn't want to spend like hours, just in a few minutes, I wanted to understand how this tool is different from the 10 other tools and how it is the right one for me, to invest in and to, test it. So, and today you answered many of my questions, because now on aec+tech, every tool page, we ask a certain number of questions. Some of them are easier, like pricing or what do you do, but some are like more complex. And AEC is such a unique industry. It's just so different from all the other industries that no one from outside can really understand how specific all these tools can be. So it's a broad industry, from kitchen renovation to infrastructure projects. This is all AEC. And at the same time, people don't have time, so you have to, make sure that you are introducing yourself, through your homepage, through your website, right? So thank you so much for all this great information, that in such an insightful, presentation that you shared with us. So I encourage our audience to get in touch with Nikita, and regardless of where you are in your product development stage, just get in touch with Nikita and get help, because I assume it's something that you can do always, regardless of whether you're at the very earlier stages of development, or maybe you have a very developed great product, but your website and your homepage is all you have for the world to learn about your tool.
Exactly. And I would encourage, if anyone's here, definitely sign up to my Dirt Dispatch newsletter, because I do a lot of those kind of like, I dissect a lot of homepages and that on there as well. So I think sometimes that's a really good way to learn, is to see what other people are doing and to kind of see where they're sitting. And yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And your conference, again, Nikita, it's in Australia and in October, right?
Yeah, so it's going to have 250 architecture firm owners in the room, decision makers. So again, if you're a platform that wants to get in front of architects, definitely reach out, because it's going to be, or if you want to kind of enter the Australian, the APAC market, it's going to be unboring. So we've got a comedian, and it'll be pretty funny. So yeah.
That's great. Wonderful. It was wonderful to have you. So have a great day. Thanks again for accommodating our time zone, US time zone. I know it's very early for you. So I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.